All right, so let's just get right into it today. In today's world, it feels like you really have to be scam savvy
Mm.
to stay ahead of the curve. And you shared some really interesting sources about global scams, and I'm ready to dive in.
Yeah.
One thing that really struck me right off the bat was the sheer scale of this problem. We're not just talking about losing a few bucks here and there.
Right.
The FTC reports billions are lost every year to romance scams alone.
It is wild.
That's just unbelievable.
It is. And I think what's so interesting about this is how these scams have kind of moved beyond, just trying to steal your credit card number. They're really starting to tap into some of those deeper human emotions, the need for connection or fear of missing out or that kind of dread of authority figures.
Yeah, it's like they're not just hacking our devices, they're actually hacking our psychology.
Exactly. And that's, I think, what makes them so effective.
Yeah, for sure.
So our sources outlined kind of 5 main categories of scams: phishing, romance, investment, tech support, and impersonation. Let's start with phishing because, it feels like that's been around forever,
Yeah.
but the techniques are getting more and more sophisticated.
Yeah. I feel like I've been getting phishing emails since like dial-up was a thing.
Right.
But the sources mentioned things like spear phishing, which I'd never even heard of.
Yeah, so spear phishing is almost like a laser-focused attack. So instead of just sending out like a mass email, to millions of people hoping that some will bite, they're actually tailoring their emails to target specific individuals or organizations.
Oh.
So they might do research on social media or company websites or even like use data from previous data breaches to make their messages really, really convincing.
So it's not just those generic, like your account's been compromised emails anymore.
All right.
It's actually really personalized manipulation, which is kind of terrifying.
It is. And the goal is to make you feel like, this message is legitimate and urgent. So you'll just click on that link without thinking twice.
Right.
And speaking of which, the sources point out that phishing is one of the major culprits in data breaches worldwide.
That makes sense, especially as more and more of our lives move online.
Yeah.
What are some of the real-world examples that kind of stood out to you?
Well, those fake bank emails are still a classic,
Oh, yeah.
They'll use subject lines that are really designed to trigger that sense of panic, like urgent account suspension or suspicious activity detected.
Oh, yeah.
And then they'll create emails that look almost identical to real bank communications,
Why?
complete with logos and, that official sounding language.
So you're more likely to click without thinking if you're already kind of stressed out about your account.
Exactly. And that malicious link that they often include will take you to a fake website that's designed to steal your login credentials.
Right.
And it might even look identical to your real bank's website.
Oh, wow.
So it can be really hard to spot the difference.
That's so sneaky. And the sources mentioned tech support scams, which I feel like everyone has encountered at some point. Those pop-up messages that say, like, your computer's infected or something like that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And those can be so alarming.
Yeah.
Because they really play on that fear of something going wrong with your technology.
Right.
And these scammers will use official sounding names.
Right.
They might even say they're calling from Microsoft or Apple.
Yeah.
And their websites or pop-ups often look just like legitimate tech support pages.
Yeah.
So again, it can be really hard to tell the difference.
Right. And what's scary is that they often specifically target older adults who might be less tech-savvy or more trusting of authority figures.
Exactly. And that makes them particularly vulnerable because, the scammer might ask for remote access to your computer,
Right.
which gives them the ability to install malware or steal your information.
Yeah, or even lock you out of your own system.
Exactly. So the damage can be significant.
Okay, so before we move on, let's talk about some ways to protect ourselves. Okay, because this is all starting to sound a little bit scary.
Huh?
The sources mention two-factor authentication. Can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
Sure. So two-factor authentication is kind of like adding an extra lock on your digital door.
Okay.
So it requires you to provide 2 different forms of identification to access your account.
Got it.
So even if somebody steals your password, they can't get in without that second factor, which is usually a code sent to your phone or your email address.
So it's just that extra layer of security that makes it so much harder for the scammers to actually get into your accounts, even if they've gotten your password.
Exactly.
It's good to know.
And this kind of brings us to our next category, which is romance scams,
Okay.
where that manipulation is even more subtle and really emotionally driven.
Yeah, these scams always make me think of that movie Catfish,
Yes.
where people are creating these whole fake online personas.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just Hollywood. Scammers create these elaborate profiles on dating sites or social media, and they often use stolen photos or craft these really believable backstories.
And they might even use information from your public social media profiles to make themselves seem more compatible.
Exactly.
So they really do their homework to make themselves seem like the perfect match.
To do.
What really stood out to me in the sources was that these scams can sometimes go on for years.
It's true.
I mean, that's a really long con.
It is a very long con, and they build these relationships slowly,
Right.
showering their victims with attention and affection, really mimicking the patterns of a genuine emotional connection. And then eventually they might invent some kind of crisis.
Right.
A family emergency or a medical bill or a sudden travel expense.
Right. To tug at your heartstrings.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the sources highlighted that seniors are often targets, especially those who might be lonely or isolated.
Sadly, that is the case, and they lose a lot more than money in these situations.
Right.
Their sense of trust and hope is often shattered.
Yeah. It's just heartbreaking. The sources mentioned a really insidious tactic called catfishing.
Yeah.
Where the scammer is creating a completely fabricated identity
Right.
to lure the victim into a relationship that really only exists online.
Yeah, and they might even use that fake identity to solicit explicit photos or videos,
Oh, wow.
which they can then use for blackmail.
Oh, gosh.
So it can be a really dangerous situation.
So what are some red flags that people should look out for in online dating?
Okay.
How can they tell if someone's genuine or if it might be a scam?
So one big red flag is if someone professes love very quickly, especially if they've never met you in person.
Right.
Another is if they avoid video calls or meeting up. They might claim they're overseas or have some other reason for not being able to meet.
That makes sense. If someone's really interested in you, they would want to connect in a more meaningful way.
Exactly.
Not just through texts or emails.
And if they start asking for money, especially for things like travel expenses or medical bills, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, that's never a good sign.
No legitimate online dating should involve financial transactions.
Right. The sources recommend doing a reverse image search of their profile picture.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
To see if it's been stolen from somebody else's profile.
Yeah, and ultimately just trust your gut.
Yeah.
If something feels off, it probably is. Don't be afraid to ask questions, verify information, and if you're ever unsure, just walk away.
Yeah, and this kind of leads us into another category that preys on a different kind of vulnerability, that desire for financial gain.
Right.
Investment scams.
Investment scams.
This feels particularly relevant with the rise of cryptocurrency and all these promises of, getting rich quick.
Oh, absolutely. The lure of easy money is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And scammers are incredibly adept at exploiting this human desire, particularly in the kind of unregulated world of cryptocurrency.
Right. Okay, let's get specific. What are some red flags to watch out for? Like, what are these scammers actually doing to trick people?
Well, one common tactic is to create these fake trading platforms.
Good.
So they'll design websites that look just like legitimate investment platforms, complete with, fake charts and graphs and testimonials.
Wow.
To make it look like you're investing through a reputable company, but it's all just a facade.
So you think you're putting money into this legitimate investment, but really it's just going straight into the scammer's pocket?
Exactly. You might even be able to deposit funds.
Oh, wow.
But you'll never be able to withdraw them.
Gosh, that's awful.
Another classic tactic is the Ponzi scheme, which has been around for ages.
Oh, yeah, the classic pyramid scheme where early investors get paid with money from new recruits, and then eventually the whole thing just collapses.
Exactly. And one of the most famous examples of this is Bernie Madoff's multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme,
Right.
which devastated countless investors.
Wow. That's a sobering reminder that these scams can happen at any level,
They can.
even among seasoned investors.
Yeah.
So in addition to fake trading platforms and Ponzi schemes, what else should we be looking out for?
Well, in the realm of cryptocurrency, pump and dump schemes are really common. So this involves artificially inflating the price of a cryptocurrency through coordinated buying and false hype.
Okay, so they're basically creating this frenzy around a particular coin, driving up the price, and then they sell all their holdings at the peak, leaving everyone else holding the bag.
Exactly. It's like a digital game of musical chairs, and most investors end up standing when the music stops.
So with all these scams out there, how can people protect themselves, especially in this world of, fast-paced online investing?
Well, thorough research is absolutely essential.
Okay.
Don't just jump into an investment because a friend on social media is promoting it. Take the time to really understand the underlying asset, the company, the technology, and just be realistic about the risks involved.
The sources also emphasize sticking to reputable trading platforms,
Yes.
ones that are regulated by government agencies.
Right.
Don't be swayed by promises of guaranteed returns or these exclusive investment opportunities that, come through unsolicited channels.
Those are often huge red flags.
Yeah.
And if you're ever unsure about an investment, it's always a good idea to talk to a licensed financial advisor.
Okay.
They can provide guidance and help you avoid some really costly mistakes.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, so we've talked about phishing scams, romance scams, and investment scams.
Yeah,
That's a lot to unpack, but I think we're just getting started, so stay with us.
absolutely. We'll be back with more after the break.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're digging even deeper into the world of global scams, and in this part, we're going to uncover some scams that often fly under the radar.
Right.
The ones that maybe target very specific groups or exploit those brand new technologies that we're all trying to keep up with.
It's true. Scammers are always looking for new angles, new ways to exploit our trust and our desire for convenience.
Speaking of trust, the sources that you shared highlighted a category called social engineering scams. And honestly, these are a bit unsettling because they're all about manipulating human psychology rather than, just relying on technical tricks.
Exactly. Social engineering is all about exploiting our natural tendencies, our helpfulness, our respect for authority, our desire to avoid conflict. So, for example, imagine you get a phone call from someone claiming to be from your IT department,
So?
and they say there's a security issue and they need to update your software.
Okay.
They sound professional, they use all the right jargon.
Yeah, you'd probably be inclined to trust them, especially if you're not super tech savvy.
Right, and they might ask for your login credentials or guide you to a website that looks legitimate but is actually designed to steal your information.
So it's not just about hacking computers anymore. It's about hacking human behavior.
Exactly.
The sources call this pretexting, right? Where scammers create this believable scenario to gain your trust and then extract information or money.
Precisely. And they'll often do their research beforehand, gathering details about you from social media or company websites to really tailor their approach and make their story more convincing.
It's almost like they're creating this custom-made scam just for you based on your specific vulnerabilities that's both impressive and incredibly creepy.
It is, and this ties into another tactic called baiting.
Okay.
This is where they offer something enticing like a free gift card or a discount code or early access to a hot new product to lure you into clicking on a malicious link or giving up your personal information.
Oh, yeah. The classic too good to be true scenario.
Yeah.
I feel like we've all seen those tempting offers online that make you wonder, what's the catch?
Exactly, and often the catch is that you end up compromising your security or your financial information.
Right. So the sources emphasize that with social engineering scams, your best defense is really just a healthy dose of skepticism.
I agree.
So being wary of unsolicited contact, those random phone calls, emails, or messages, that's key.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask questions, verify the source, take your time, and don't let anyone pressure you into giving up personal information or taking an action that doesn't feel right.
It's like that old adage, trust but verify. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about e-commerce scams. These feel particularly relevant these days as more and more people shop online.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. The convenience of e-commerce has also opened up a whole new landscape for scammers.
Right.
One of the most common scams in this category is the fake online store.
I could see how that would be easy to fall for. You're browsing online, you find a great deal on something you want, and bam, you're on a scammer's website.
Exactly. These websites can look incredibly professional with, stolen logos, product photos, even customer reviews.
Wow.
But it's all a facade.
So what are some telltale signs that you're on a fake online store, besides the deals being unbelievably good, of course?
We'll look for red flags like poor website design, spelling errors, grammatical mistakes.
Yeah.
Legitimate retailers, they invest in professional web development, so if the site looks amateurish, that's a warning sign.
That makes sense.
Also, pay close attention to the payment options if they only accept wire transfers or cryptocurrency. That's a major red flag.
Yeah, most legitimate retailers offer those secure payment options like credit cards or PayPal, which offers some level of buyer protection.
Right, and speaking of buyer protection, let's talk about another e-commerce scam that plays out on auction platforms like eBay. It's called the phony auction scam.
Okay, so how does this one work? Is it basically like those fake online stores, but in an auction setting?
It is similar. Scammers create fake listings for products that don't actually exist, often using stolen photos and descriptions to make their listings look really convincing. They might even create fake bidding histories to drive up the price and create that sense of urgency.
So you get caught up in the excitement of the auction, you think you're getting a great deal, and then poof, the seller disappears with your money.
Sadly, yes, that's often what happens.
I mean, that's awful.
The sources recommend that you always check the seller's feedback rating and history. Legitimate sellers will have positive feedback from previous buyers. If a seller has no feedback or negative feedback, that's a red flag.
And it's always a good idea to read the auction description carefully and ask questions if anything seems unclear or suspicious. Don't be afraid to contact the seller directly through the platform's messaging system.
Exactly. A legitimate seller will be happy to answer your questions and provide more information, and always stick to the platform's secure payment system. If a seller tries to direct you to pay outside of the platform, that's a huge red flag.
Right. Speaking of payment shenanigans, the sources also mention a scam called payment redirection, which targets sellers rather than buyers.
That's right. This one involves a scammer posing as a potential buyer.
Okay.
They'll express interest in purchasing your item, but then try to redirect you to a fake payment portal or ask for payment through an untraceable method like wire transfer or cryptocurrency.
So they're basically trying to circumvent the platform's security measures and get you to send money directly to them.
Exactly. And they might even offer to pay more than your asking price to entice you to go along with their scheme.
Oh, wow. That's so devious. It's like they're playing on your desire to make a sale and maybe even get a little bonus on top. What can sellers do to protect themselves from this?
The most important thing is to always use the platform's secure payment system. Don't be tempted to accept payment outside of the platform, even if the buyer offers a higher price.
And if a buyer tries to redirect you to a different payment portal or asks for payment through an unusual method, trust your instincts and just walk away from the deal.
Exactly. It's better to lose a sale than to become a victim of a scam. And speaking of things that are not what they seem, let's talk about counterfeit goods scams.
Oh yeah, this one feels like a bit of a minefield, especially with so many people shopping online these days. It's hard to know if you're getting the real deal, especially when you're buying from third-party sellers.
You're right. Counterfeiters have become incredibly sophisticated, creating fake versions of everything from designer handbags and clothing to electronics, cosmetics, even pharmaceuticals.
Counterfeit pharmaceuticals is particularly scary because it could be dangerous or even life-threatening.
Absolutely. The sources highlight that counterfeit goods are a massive problem online, and it can be really difficult to distinguish a fake from the genuine article.
So how can we protect ourselves?
Right.
What should we look out for when shopping online?
Well, the first tip is to be wary of deals that seem too good to be true. If a designer handbag is being sold for a fraction of its retail price, it's probably a fake.
That's a classic red flag for almost any scam, right? If it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. And whenever possible, stick to reputable retailers and authorized sellers. If you're buying from a third-party seller, check their feedback rating and history.
Okay.
Look for established sellers with positive reviews.
The sources also recommend looking closely at product photos and descriptions. If the images are blurry or the description is vague or poorly written, that could be a sign that the product is not genuine.
Right. And don't hesitate to ask the seller questions about the product's authenticity. If they're evasive or unable to provide specific details, that's a red flag.
So it's all about doing your due diligence, researching the seller, scrutinizing the product, and trusting your instincts.
Exactly. And remember, if you're ever unsure about the authenticity of a product, it's better to err on the side of caution and not make the purchase.
That's great advice. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into global scams with some final thoughts and some really important tips on how to stay safe.
Wow.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of global scams, and in this final part, we're going to get into some scams that really prey on something fundamental, or compassion.
Right. You're talking about charity and disaster relief scams. These are particularly insidious because they exploit our empathy, especially in the wake of tragedies like natural disasters or humanitarian crises.
It's a time when people are most vulnerable, and most generous, wanting to help those in need. But the sources highlight that sadly scammers see this as an opportunity.
They do, and one of their main tactics is creating fake charities or websites that mimic legitimate organizations. often using similar names or logos, even using that emotional storytelling to deceive well-intentioned donors.
So you think you're giving to a worthy cause, but your money is actually going straight into a scammer's pocket.
Exactly. And they might even create elaborate backstories or testimonials to make themselves appear more credible. They know that during times of crisis, people are more likely to act on emotion rather than logic.
It's like they're hijacking our goodwill. The sources mentioned a few red flags to look out for. Can you walk us through those?
Sure, one of the biggest red flags is a lack of transparency. Legitimate charities are typically very open about their mission, their financials, how they use donations if an organization is vague about its operations or refuses to provide information about its finances. That's a major warning sign.
That makes sense. Transparency is so crucial when it comes to charitable giving. What other red flags should we be watching out for?
Another red flag is the use of high-pressure tactics.
Hmm.
Legitimate charities will welcome your donation, but they won't pressure you into giving immediately or demand a specific amount if you're feeling pressured or guilt-tripped into donating. That's a red flag.
So it's essential to take our time, do our research, and not let emotions cloud our judgment, even when we're really eager to help.
I agree. And be wary of unsolicited requests for donations. If you receive a random phone call, email, or social media message asking for money, be extra cautious. Legitimate charities typically reach out through more official channels.
So if someone is aggressively soliciting donations kind of out of the blue, it's best to just ignore it.
I think it's always best to err on the side of caution. Do your research, verify the organization, and if you're unsure, donate to a well-established charity like the Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders.
That's great advice. All right, let's move on to a scam category that I think hits close to home for a lot of people: job and employment scams. These prey on people's aspirations, especially those who are actively seeking new opportunities or maybe feeling a bit desperate in their job search.
All right, and they often target people who are unemployed or underemployed or, eager for a career change, offering them seemingly dream jobs with amazing benefits.
The sources paint a pretty bleak picture of how these scams operate. Can you give us some more insight into that?
Yeah, well, one of the most common tactics is the fake job listing.
Okay.
So scammers will create phony job postings on job boards, company websites, social media, often mirroring real companies to appear legitimate.
So you think you've stumbled upon this incredible opportunity, but it's all just a carefully constructed lie.
It is, and the job might sound too good to be true. A high salary, flexible hours, amazing perks, and when you apply, you might be asked to provide very personal information or even pay for training materials or background checks.
It's like they're preying on people's hopes and dreams and then turning around and exploiting them for financial gain.
Exactly.
What are some of those red flags that can help us spot these fake job listings?
Well, one big red flag is a vague job description. Legitimate job postings typically provide very specific details about the role, the responsibilities, the required qualifications. If the description is vague or the requirements seem unrealistic, that's a warning sign.
Okay. And the application process itself can be a red flag, right? Like
Yeah.
if you get offered a job without a proper interview.
Oh, absolutely. Legitimate employers typically conduct thorough interviews, whether in person or via video call, before extending a job offer if you're offered a job without an interview, or if the interview process seems rushed or unprofessional, that's a red flag.
And the sources really emphasize that you should never, ever have to pay to apply for a job.
That's right. Legitimate employers will never ask you to pay for training materials, background checks, or any other upfront fees.
So if a job opportunity requires you to shell out money before you've even started working, that's a huge red flag.
Definitely walk away from that opportunity.
All right, good advice. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about another category of job scams, those work-from-home scams. These can be really tempting because they appeal to people who are looking for flexibility and the ability to earn money from home.
Right. Especially for stay-at-home parents or students or people with disabilities who might have difficulty working outside the home.
Exactly. But the sources point out that these opportunities are often riddled with scams.
That's true. Scammers will often advertise fake work-from-home opportunities like envelope stuffing, online surveys, data entry, those things that promise easy money for minimal effort.
But as we've seen with so many of these other scams, there's always a catch.
There is. You might be asked to pay for training materials or startup costs, or you might be required to purchase products or services from the company before you can even start working.
So you're essentially paying to work for them.
Exactly. And in many cases, the work never materializes or the promised payments never arrive.
That's so disheartening. So what are some ways to avoid these work-from-home scams?
Well, first and foremost, be wary of any opportunity that promises easy money for minimal effort. Legitimate work-from-home jobs will typically require some level of skill or experience.
Okay.
Also, research the company thoroughly. Check their website, look for reviews from other workers, verify their contact information if something seems up better. Trust your gut and move on.
So it's all about being proactive and doing your homework.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about a category of scams that often masquerades as legitimate business opportunities, pyramid schemes, or multi-level marketing scams.
Right. Those are the ones where the focus is really on recruitment rather than actual product sales.
Exactly. Participants are typically required to pay an upfront fee to join, and then they're heavily incentivized to recruit new members. They often make more money from recruiting than they do from selling the actual products.
It's like that classic image of a pyramid with those at the top reaping the rewards while those at the bottom struggle to make any money at all.
And unfortunately, these schemes often target vulnerable individuals who are struggling financially or are easily swayed by promises of wealth and success.
That's true.
So what are some red flags that can help us identify pyramid schemes?
One big red flag is an overemphasis on recruitment over product sales. If
Right.
the primary focus of the business opportunity is on recruiting new members, that's a warning sign.
And the compensation structure is often a giveaway, right? Like if you're earning more from recruiting people than from selling products.
Exactly. Legitimate businesses generate revenue primarily from product sales, not recruitment.
So if a business opportunity seems heavily reliant on recruitment and the earning claims seem unrealistic, it's probably best to just steer clear.
I would agree with that. Do your research, be cautious of high-pressure tactics, and remember if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
That's a good rule of thumb for pretty much everything in life.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into global scams, from phishing and romance scams to charity scams, e-commerce scams, and job scams. It can feel really overwhelming. But I think the key takeaway here is that knowledge is power.
Absolutely. By understanding the tactics used by scammers, we can be better equipped to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
The sources emphasize that awareness is our best defense. We need to be proactive, skeptical, and always willing to question anything that seems suspicious or too good to be true.
Right. And don't be afraid to talk about these scams with your friends, your family, your colleagues. Spreading awareness can help protect others from becoming victims.
And if you do find yourself targeted by a scam, don't be embarrassed to report it. The more we report these scams, the better equipped law enforcement and consumer protection agencies will be to crack down on these criminals.
Exactly. And remember, there are resources available if you've been affected by a scam. Organizations like the Federal Trade Commission and the Better Business Bureau offer guidance and support for victims.
That's great to know. We'll be sure to include links to those resources in the show notes. Now, that's it for our deep dive into global scams. We hope this information has been helpful, and we encourage you to stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe out there.